There is a silent weariness that many women feel, but rarely manage to explain. It's the exhaustion of trying to be sweet all the time, understanding all the time, patient all the time, even when something inside you starts to close up, to fade, to feel too small to contain who you really are. From an early age, many women learn that growing up emotionally means overlooking everything, softening everything, swallowing discomfort, and not bothering anyone. That being feminine means being agreeable. Emotional maturity means knowing how to adapt, and without realizing it. They spend years confusing growth with emotional silence and sweetness with self-neglect. But true female growth doesn't happen when you mold yourself to be accepted. It begins when you respect yourself emotionally, even knowing that this may generate discomfort, tension, or even because growing up doesn't mean becoming easier to love. It's about becoming more true to yourself. Perhaps you've already felt that the sweeter you try to be, the less noticed you feel. Perhaps you've already noticed that the more you adapt, the further you become from yourself. And that doesn't mean you're failing as a woman. It simply means that you were taught to grow outwardly, when real growth happens from within. In this video, we're going to talk about why being sweet all the time isn't a sign of emotional maturity, how this idea profoundly influences how you position yourself in relationships, and what changes when a woman begins to grow without negating herself, without hardening herself, and without needing to prove anything to anyone. If this content is helping you reflect and understand yourself better, follow the channel and like this video. When you do this, you show me that this type of conversation is important. You help me continue bringing profound content like this, and you also allow this video to reach more women who need to hear this message. By following the channel, you ensure that future videos reach you and continue this process of emotional growth with me. Many women don't realize when they learn that being sweet all the time was a virtue. But this idea almost always originated long before adulthood, in small, silent lessons that accumulated over time. From an early age, they observe that they are praised when they are understanding, when they don't complain, when they understand everything, when they adapt, and little by little, they internalize the message that love, acceptance, and belonging are directly linked to the ability to not cause discomfort. This myth of constant sweetness leads many women to believe that growing emotionally means being calm in any situation, keeping a soft voice even when something hurts, and turning discomfort into silence to preserve bonds. And the problem isn't sweetness itself, because gentleness is a genuinely feminine quality. But the idea that it should exist even when there is disrespect, emotional confusion, or boundaries being crossed. When a woman believes she needs to be sweet all the time, she begins to negotiate with herself about what she feels, downplaying what hurts, minimizing what bothers her, and convincing herself that she is being mature, when in reality, she is just disconnecting from her own emotions. Over time, this disconnect creates a void that is difficult to explain, because outwardly, she seems balanced, understanding, and strong. But internally, there is a deep weariness of always giving in, always understanding, always being the more emotionally flexible party in the relationship. This pattern doesn't stem from weakness. It stems from the fear of losing, the fear of not being chosen, and the fear that by taking a firmer stance, something precious might slip away. And that's exactly why so many women confuse growth with emotional suppression, failing to realize that maturity isn't about suppressing feelings, but about learning to listen to them honestly and respectfully. True female growth begins the moment woman stops trying to conform to external expectations and starts developing a more honest relationship with what she feels, thinks, and perceives in her own experiences. It's not a noisy, immediate, or linear process, because growing emotionally requires the courage to look inward and admit that, at many moments, the gentleness that seemed like maturity was just fear of losing, of displeasing, or of being alone. An emotionally mature woman is not one who remains calm in all situations, but one who can recognize when something exceeds her internal limits and chooses not to violate herself emotionally in order to maintain an image of balance. She understands that maturity is not the absence of reaction, but rather the presence of awareness, because feeling discomfort, unease, or sadness does not signify emotional regression, but rather a sign that something important needs to be heard. Growing as a woman also means learning to stand by your own truth without having to harden yourself, attack others, or justify yourself all the time. It's about developing the ability to assert yourself with firmness and gentleness at the same time, knowing that respect begins internally and is naturally reflected in how others interact with you. This attitude doesn't drive away the right people. It merely filters out those who benefited from your lack of boundaries. When a woman truly begins to grow emotionally, she stops negotiating her feelings to preserve relationships and starts choosing bonds where she can exist fully without having to diminish parts of herself to fit in. And this change, though subtle on the outside, completely transforms how she perceives herself, expresses herself, and connects with others. Because now her gentleness stems not from fear, but from the emotional security she has built within herself. If this video is helping you better understand what true female growth is, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content like this. When you subscribe, you ensure that future videos reach you, and you also show me that this type of deeper, more honest conversation really makes sense for women like you. When a woman truly begins to grow emotionally, something silently but profoundly changes in the way men relate to her. Not because she is trying to provoke this effect, but because her inner self ceases to be negotiable. She no longer needs to convince, over, or constantly adapt to maintain interest. Because now there is consistency between what she feels, what she expresses, and what she accepts. And this consistency is felt immediately. Men respond much more to emotional presence than to speeches or attempts to please. And when a woman stops suppressing herself in order to be accepted, she begins to convey confidence, clarity, and emotional integrity. This creates a new type of dynamic where the man understands, even unconsciously, that this woman is not available for games, confusion, or shallow relationships, because she knows who she is and what she deserves emotionally. Contrary to what many women fear, growing emotionally doesn't scare away men interested in a real connection, but quickly reveals those who only felt comfortable when she was more flexible, quieter, and more understanding than she should have been. And this filter, although it may seem strange at first, is a form of emotional protection because it prevents the woman from continuing to invest energy in relationships that require her to diminish herself in order to function. An emotionally developed woman doesn't become cold, distant, or inaccessible. She becomes clear, present, and firm. And this combination inspires respect even before it awakens desire. And when respect is established, the relationship ceases to be a game of constant adaptation and becomes a space where both need to grow, assert themselves, and take emotional responsibility. Ultimately, female empowerment changes the dynamic with men because it shifts a woman's starting point from seeking validation to offering presence. And this change transforms not only who approaches her, but especially the quality of the connections that remain. When a woman truly begins to grow emotionally, the most profound change doesn't happen in her relationships, nor in how others treat her, but in how she begins to feel within herself, because now there is a silent alignment between what she feels, what she thinks, and what she chooses to accept. She stops living in constant emotional vigilance, trying to predict reactions, avoid conflicts, or adjust to behavior to maintain harmony, and begins to experience a new sense of inner peace, as if she could finally breathe without fear of being too much or not enough. This growth doesn't eliminate sensitivity or the capacity to care, but it removes the burden of guilt that previously accompanied any attempt to take a stand. The woman begins to understand that respecting her boundaries is not an act of selfishness, but of maturity, and that saying no, stepping away, or recalculating her emotional path does not mean failure, but rather self-care. Over time, she realizes that she no longer needs to prove her worth through excessive sweetness, endless understanding, or constant availability, because her value ceases to depend on external approval and becomes anchored in a more stable relationship with herself. And this inner stability creates a new form of emotional security, where she feels whole even when someone doesn't stay, doesn't choose her, or doesn't reciprocate in the way she expected. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of this process is the silence that arises. After growth, an inner silence where there is no longer the urgency to be accepted, explained, or validated. Only the quiet clarity of someone who knows who they are and doesn't compromise that for fear of losing connections. And it is in this inner space, calmer and more honest, that a woman begins to relate not from a place of lack, but from presence, choosing relationships that add to her life, instead of relationships that demand her diminishment. Growing as a woman isn't about becoming more rigid, colder, or more distant, but about learning to remain true to yourself, even when it requires emotional courage. It's about understanding that sweetness still exists, but now it stems from security, not fear, from conscious choice, not the need to be accepted. Throughout this video, it became clear that many women are not failing in their relationships. They have simply been taught to confuse love with over-adaptation, maturity with silence, and femininity with self-neglect. And when this confusion begins to dissipate, something reorganizes itself internally, because the woman begins to relate with more truth, more presence, and less effort, ceasing to carry the emotional weight of relationships alone. True female growth doesn't require you to abandon your sensitivity, but to learn how to protect it. It doesn't require you to stop caring, but to stop putting yourself second in order to maintain relationships. And this isn't about pleasing men or improving relationships, but so that you can exist fully within any relationship without having to mold yourself to fit in. Perhaps this process isn't quick or comfortable at all times, but it is profoundly liberating, because when a woman truly grows emotionally, she stops adapting out of fear and begins to choose consciously. And that's the point where emotional life becomes lighter, more honest, and more aligned with who you truly are. If this video resonated with you, please follow the channel and like this content, because it shows me that this type of conversation is important and helps me continue bringing profound reflections like this to more women. And if you've ever experienced a situation where you realized you were being too sweet at your own expense, tell me about it in the comments, because your story can help other women feel less alone in this growth process.